It is 2 after the hour, according to my clock. I'm Tom Webster, partner at Sounds Profitable, and I am joined today by a very special guest, Alex Caggia from SiriusXM. How are you?
I'm good, Tom. I got you beat, by the way. I did about 50 crunches,
You
so
did 50 crunches.
just saying in that 2 minutes. But yeah, I'm doing good. I'm stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'll have to look up what a crunch is. Um, it's the word that comes after captain, I think, for breakfasts. That's how I'm familiar with crunches. We have a jam-packed webinar here today. We've got so much new data for you. We've got, of course, the data that you're accustomed to seeing from Sounds Profitable, but also Alex has brought a whole gym bag full of incredible insights that they've been able to collect at the SiriusXM Podcast Network because they have been so much in these two categories. And we are talking about two categories of podcasts today. We're talking about the audiences for both health and fitness, and the audiences for self-improvement. And the reason why we decided to link these together is, it's kind of twofold. They're obviously complementary. They're obviously about a growth mindset in some ways. And the interesting thing about these two segments, as I'm going to show you in just a moment, is that while there is an incredible amount of overlap between the audiences, there's also an incredible amount of not overlap between the audiences. And that gives you a very interesting opportunity, which I'm going to talk about once we get started. But we're here today to talk about the power of purpose-driven podcasting, which, as I say it now out loud, that's a presentation that produces lots of plosives, prompting a pop filter. I'll have to think about that going forward. But let's go ahead and get started here with the power of purpose-driven podcasting. And I've got a couple of quick things to get into here before I toss things over to Alex. One is that Alex is not the only guest that we have here today. We also have another special guest from SiriusXM Media, and I'm going to let him kick things off here.
Hi, my name is Case Kenny. I am the host of New Mindset Who Dis, a podcast with over 700 episodes, all about celebrating the power of mindsets, mindfulness, and mental health. For me, podcasting is the most powerful form of content and wellness. It allows for me to connect with an audience over years and to break down complex topics into small, digestible pieces, all while people go about their busy lives. And it's a great time for brands to invest in wellness podcasts because when someone chooses to listen to a podcast like mine, they're deciding to change their life for the better, vulnerably. That's a powerful environment for brands to build trust and align on values that actually matter to people. So thanks for being in a space that changes lives, one episode at a time. Hi, my name's Kate.
Those eyes they're just piercing. They just pierce straight through me. I don't know about you guys. So here's why we're talking about these two particular genres. This is from the podcast landscape, the most recent podcast landscape that we conducted last fall. By the way, this will be back again this fall. And in this particular graph, we're looking at the popularity of the various genres of podcasting in terms of the monthly audience. And if you look at the audience for both self-improvement and health and fitness, they're about the same, right? 22%, 21% of the monthly podcast audience say that they have consumed those genres at least in the past month. The interesting thing is the overlap here. For each of those two genres, one is twice as likely to be a listener to the other genre compared to the general public. So in other words, 45% of health and fitness listeners also listened or watch self-improvement content. And the same is virtually identical with self-improvement consumers who also consume health and fitness content. And there's two interesting things about this. Number one, that's such a strong overlap that if you kind of tweak messages, you can really reach frequency by having a complementary buy on both. The other interesting thing, of course, is that for both of these genres, there's a significant percentage, over half, that don't listen to the other, which means you also get reach. So this having both genres in your buy nets you, I think, a very complementary audience, an audience that shares a lot of characteristics, but also allows you to have a broad reach and a very broad demographic reach, which I'm going to get to a little bit later. But one of the things that really excites me about this webinar is that I get to learn some new things. I get to learn some new data as well that I have not seen. And that is in Alex's gym bag. So I'm going to turn things over to Alex and tell us what you've learned about these two particular categories and why they matter.
All right. Well, thanks, Tom. I mean, no surprise that your, insights and intuition are on point. I mean, wellness in all its forms has definitely transformed into two massive categories in the podcast space, and those audience just continue to grow immensely. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I think it's worth zooming out for a moment and taking a step back to look at the bigger picture of how we actually got here. To really understand the wellness craze that we're seeing today, we need to understand what's driving it underneath the surface. So there's this quiet shift happening, and more people are turning inward to reflect and redefine what it means to be well, to feel whole, and to truly be themselves. Wellness isn't just about, the overpriced green smoothies or cold plunges or 9-step skincare routines, right? It's about agency. It's about agency over our minds and our bodies and the space that we occupy in the world. And so for a long time, that agency felt out of reach. We've been living in this age of impossible standards, constantly told how to look, how to think, how to feel. And now, with AI accelerating expectations around productivity and performance, those pressures are only intensifying. But people are pushing back, and they're pushing back with intention. So, wellness has evolved into something more than a fleeting trend. It's a way of life. It's how we reclaim autonomy and presence and purpose. And it's not just about self-improvement anymore, right? It's about seeking meaning and becoming more balanced, not just better. So, whether as a personal concern or a hobby, it reflects something deeper. It's a collective response to the pace and the pressure of the chaotic world that we're living in. And as you can see here, on this slide, people are growing concerned and reevaluating their priorities and reclaiming control over their minds and bodies. So throughout this wellness epidemic, we've noticed that podcasts have become an essential tool for modern well-being. They're efficient, sure. You can listen while you're walking, commuting, cleaning. It's multitasking at its finest, right? But even without that added perk, podcasts are a productive form of entertainment. You actually get something out of it. So, whether it's learning something new or hearing a fresh perspective, or just feeling emotionally invested in the content. In a world, that's always demanding more of our attention, podcasts tend to offer audiences the chance to spend their time intentionally. They, help us feel better, think clearer, and connect on a deeper level, all without, ever needing to stare at a screen. So for a lot of people, listening to podcasts feels like, having a conversation with a friend, especially in moments of loneliness or isolation. There's comfort and there's curiosity and there's a real sense of connection. And with that being said, it's really no coincidence that the shift took off during the pandemic. When the world shut down and we were isolated and anxious, people turned to podcasts for comfort and connection and clarity. And so listening surged. And it's because that at a time when we were at our lowest, podcasts filled a real emotional need. And that habit clearly stuck. I mean, even now in a post pandemic world, that behavior hasn't really gone away, it's evolved. Podcasting has, shaped how we spend our time, how we seek out knowledge, and how we take care of ourselves. And it's become this way to optimize our time and feel grounded even on the go. So, now that you sort of understand how we got to this point, I'm gonna pass it back to Tom so he can break down the audience profile behind these growing podcast categories.
Thanks,
Thank
Alex. So we are going to talk a little bit about the audience profile, and just sort of in keeping with what Alex had to tell us, if you think about this webinar, you can play it over and over, and it's going to make you feel better. So maybe this too is a holistically well podcast for you. I hope it is. I hope it's at least soothing and not irritating. Well, let's talk about the audiences for these two segments, how they are the same. They're very, very similar, but also where they differ and how they overlap, and the real opportunity there, I think, for advertisers, listeners, buyers, and stakeholders, really. First of all, let's look at the age profiles for the audiences of these two segments. And they are a little bit different. There is a statistical significance here to the difference. And I think the easiest way to characterize that is that the self-improvement podcast audience is a little bit younger than the health and fitness podcast audience. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that represents, first of all, for younger listeners. And again, it's not a massive difference here, right? The ages here are pretty well distributed for both. But what this, I think, reflects is that for the self-improvement audience, there's a real growth mindset. There's a real mindset amongst, younger and older consumers here to do something to better their lives. And then in the health and fitness segment, it is a little bit older, I think, and people do tend to pay a little bit more attention to their health when they're a little bit older, right? So in some ways, while there are many overlaps and many complementary things, you are reaching two slightly different demographic profiles with these two segments. And the other thing about about these segments too is that they're also very similar in terms of gender. And we've certainly written a lot in the Sounds Profitable newsletter and with some other recent reports that we have done at how wonderful podcasts are at attracting the attention of not just men, but also women in terms of advertising messaging. And you see two very balanced audiences here in a medium where it tends to lean slightly male. Both of these audiences actually lean female in some very interesting ways. So you are, I think, reaching an interesting audience, an audience that is not necessarily as well represented by other podcast genres, and you're reaching them in an overlapping, complementary way. And that's really, I think, the tale of the tape here. And I've condensed some of the interesting complements and differences between these two segments. For the health and fitness audience, they're older. They're a little bit more established, right? They're more likely to be in the 35, 54, and 55 plus age range. They have a higher household income than the self-improvement audience strengths. But, we're not talking, again, about a massive difference here. If you are a podcast consumer, you are already more affluent than the U.S. average for household income. But just as a function of age, the health and fitness audience does have a little bit more disposable income. And they're a little more likely to have completed higher education, which is, of course, what higher income is a trailing variable of for the most part. With the self-improvement audience, they are a younger, more growth-oriented audience. They're a very big chunk in the 18 to 34 age range. They're a little bit more diverse. There's more non-white representation in that audience, and there's a much higher Hispanic representation in that audience. So again, there is considerable overlap between the two genres, but there are some key differences. And I think those differences can be maximized in slightly tweaked messaging across both. But there's no question that if you buy both genres, if you buy both audiences, you are getting a potentially powerful kind of self-reinforcing complementary buy. They have a lot of similar contexts and patterns in their lives as well. In terms of weekly listening, and when we're doing these kind of genre comparisons, we generally look at the monthly audience. But for both of these audiences, almost 3/4 consume podcasts weekly. So there's a very high weekly listening here, substantial listening time. Both audiences listen more than average for podcasting. The average is about 6 hours a week. You can see health and fitness here is 7 hours a week and self-improvement 6.4. That's a little bit more than an hour a day to podcast content. And there's also high video consumption here. And of course, as we've seen in multiple reports that we've put out with Sounds Profitable, those video components are additive and complementary and contextual and are not substitutive of the audio. It's merely what people choose to listen to in different contexts. So you might consider someone might watch a podcast about health and fitness, and they might listen to a podcast that helps them actually exercise, right? So people are going back and forth. We do know that from multiple sources of data that we have seen. When you ask both audiences, what are you spending more time with in the last 12 months? They look really similar here. In fact, the numbers here for YouTube and TikTok, the top two answers, are identical. And of course, podcasts are number 3 in a whole long list, right? We have 20 different media types in here. So what are people spending more time with? They're spending more time with podcasts, thankfully. They're spending more time with digital video, which means you have multiple touch points here. You can reach these consumers through YouTube and through TikTok, and also podcasts. They're consuming all three. They're listening to more and more and watching more and more of these kinds of content over the last 12 months. So we have multiple touch points to reach these particular consumers. That also extends, by the way, to social media usage. And again, if you're running a kind of holistic campaign here, and I use holistic in every sense of the word, then you're able to reach them on social media very easily, especially through Facebook and Instagram. Very, very similar profiles here, nearly identical with Facebook and with Instagram, maybe slightly more for health and fitness, which again, I think makes a little bit of sense with the number of health and fitness influencers there are. So this again is a complementary reinforcement because they're all in the same ecosystem. They are consuming a lot of podcasts. They're consuming a lot of digital video. They are on social a lot. And all of these things can work together in a unified fashion. They have some other preferences in terms of content and context that they also share. Both audiences overwhelmingly prefer a regular episodic format, right? And that's compared to something that is either irregular or limited series. And that number is the same for both audiences. And that, I think, is just a function of habit. And when you make growth a habit, and when you make health and fitness a habit, you tend to prefer content that fits your habitual needs. So I think that's why that number is so high. They're very driven by content. When we give them a whole list of reasons about what makes podcasts important to them, the number one reason for both, with 93% for both saying it's important, is to listen to discussions on topics of interest, right? That is the core of what a podcast is for both of these audiences. They tend to consume things via mobile, and mobile is absolutely the dominant platform here. 58% of the health and fitness audience and 61% of the self-improvement audience primarily listen to podcasts on smartphones. Now, that's primarily, not exclusively, because they both value car listening, 80% health and fitness, 78%, and exercise listening, 78 and 76%. Why are those important? Because both of these genres for these audiences can either be actively consumed, perhaps in the act of exercise, or they can be passively consumed, but ultimately they are a companion. They're a companion medium. They're a companion genre in both instances for people to take with them wherever they go, whatever they're doing, especially if they're driving or exercising. And by the way, both audiences say that they consume podcasts with other people. In particular, that health and fitness number is quite high. The average for this is significantly below that. And 16%, also higher than average, say that they listen to podcasts or watch podcasts with at least one other person. In fact, it's about 1.2. So when you're reaching this audience, you're potentially reaching a spouse as well, or you're reaching an exercise partner as well, or a whole family. So there's a bit of a content multiplier here, I think. They're natural influencers. And again, these numbers are both higher than average. When you ask the health and fitness audience and the self-improvement audience, do you ever recommend podcasts to people in your social circle? About 3/4 for both say, yes, they do. So you may be reaching multiple people simultaneously with content in these two genres, with people with co-listening, but there is also a potential evangelism effect, a potential ambassador effect for great programming, where people will tell a friend and naturally grow, right? So, and they'll talk about things that they've learned. They may talk about products that they've learned about or services that they've learned about, but these are people that are naturally inclined to be ambassadors or evangelists. And and as a part of that, they have shared interests and there are shared content things that they have in common. And I think this all wraps up into, and I'm going to use this word again, a kind of a holistic wellness journey. And again, I mentioned before at the very top that there's significant crossover between these two categories, right? So there is quite a bit of overlap. Even though there are some demographic and behavioral differences, there's still quite a bit of overlap here. They have an interest in broad wellness because of that overlap, because they're interested in both mental growth and physical health. Both audiences value content that keeps them company. And I think that's something that Alex touched on at the very beginning when she talked about how things really grew during the pandemic, but also the increased interest and concern that we all have about our mental health. And both audiences have a real learning mindset. They both highly value learning about new hobbies. That's a really high figure, 74% for the health and fitness audience, 72% for the self-improvement audience want to learn about new hobbies. They also have some other content similarities. I mentioned obviously that both audiences overlap for each other pretty considerably, but they also like comedy, they like news, they like political talk, which is tied for both, and they like true crime. So these are just the kind of salt of the earth podcast audience with a special twist. I think that they have a growth mindset, that they have a shared belief, a shared willingness, and a shared interest in growth and self improvement, whether that's mental, physical, and very much likely both. So, to wrap up what we learned from the podcast landscape, there's a real multiplier effect here if you advertise across both of these genres. First, you get a broad demographic reach because if you combine the two, you go straight from young to old, right? You get young adults, you get mature listeners, so you cover all of the key purchasing demographics if you buy both of these categories. And you can also reinforce differential messaging if you want to, with complementary messaging for each. The messaging that is in the self improvement podcast might be slightly different than the messaging that is in a health and fitness podcast. And with the overlap between the two audiences, that's going to reinforce itself and give you both reach and frequency and kind of a richer context, I think, if you buy across both categories. There's a contextual diversity here. You're connecting with consumers that are in different mindsets, whether they're being active, being physical, or being reflective and aspirational. And again, that gives you an opportunity to have differential messaging that reinforces itself. You can have holistic brand positioning here. You can associate your brand with complete wellness, both physical and mental. And again, I think all of these messages can reinforce themselves and be slightly different in each genre. And I hope that they would be. And I think finally, this allows you to participate in the physical and the mental aspects of the entire journey of an audience, the entire journey of a prospective customer base or of a segment or a target that a brand is trying to reach, and show that your brand is supportive of both. And again, it's a very highly complementary buy, very little, I would say, waste if your brand cares about these things, with some very, I think, attractive features and characteristics. And I will tell you who knows a lot about that. Alex and our friends at SiriusXM, because they have an awful lot of these podcasts, right? Including, in fact, that two of my favorites are on this page alone. So, Alex, why don't you talk a little bit more about the offering that you have and how you came to collect all of this great data?
All right. Yeah. I think it's about that time where I tell you guys, why the SiriusXM Podcast Network is the one to beat when it comes to health and wellness. We offer a robust slate of shows that span every corner of the wellness space, from mental health and mindfulness to fitness and nutrition to relationships and personal growth. We're not just participating in the conversation, we're leading it. And our network brings together some of the most trusted voices, the biggest names, and the most passionate communities in podcasting. And the growth we're seeing across our shows proves that we're, meeting the moment. I mean, just look at Mel Robbins, right? She's become a household name, flying to the top of the charts, becoming the 15th largest show in the US, and culminating millions of downloads and viewers every month. I mean, to me, that's, a clear sign that there's a real hunger for wellness content, and listeners are craving more guidance and more connection and more tools to help them navigate life. And so, Mel's undeniable success just highlights, the growing need to meet audiences wherever and whenever they want to engage. And that's exactly where our, omni-channel solutions come in. And so our hosts are shaping, the conversation across every corner of media. They're not just these voices in your ears. They're trusted thought leaders, influencing people's ideas and conversations and actions. And your brand can be part of that influence. Through our omni-channel solutions, the engagement doesn't just stop when the episode ends. We help bring your message to life across multiple touch points. And by partnering with us, your brand shows up in the right context with the right voice at the right moment, creating deeper connections and making a real impact. But of course, it's not just about where people are tuning in, right? It's also about the when, whether it's during a morning walk or a commute or a workout or winding down at night. Podcasts are often paired with these, healthy habits that help people feel grounded and focused and inspired. And there's a deep sense of trust built in as, these listeners rely on their favorite host to show up with fresh content and valuable insights and authentic conversation. It's really become this consistent force of good in their lives, always there and always adding value. And the fan love is real. Oh my goodness. Our shows have cultivated deeply engaged communities and support systems. And our listeners don't just tune in, right? They show up, they speak out, and they share how much these hosts really mean to them. From commenting on their social to Apple podcast reviews to live podcast events, these fans express genuine gratitude as these voices have become, a meaningful part of their lives. And that level of connection creates an unmatched environment for brands and advertisers. Wellness by nature is a space rooted in trust and care and positive intention. It's honestly one of the most brand safe categories in media. And as you can see here on this slide, we've partnered with Barometer to assess a collection of SiriusXM wellness shows and found no risky content across every brand suitability category. So, with strong brand safety and contextual suitability at the core, our shows create an environment where ads don't just fit, they resonate. And the result is an overwhelmingly positive response from listeners. I mean, when messaging is delivered by trusted hosts and in spaces that feel, authentic and aligned, audiences tend to be more open and more engaged and more likely to take action. I mean, with 93% of health and wellness podcast listeners taking any action after hearing a podcast ad. So yeah, at SiriusXM Media, we're not just delivering content. We're helping people feel better, think deeper, and live more intentionally. And that's the kind of impact that lasts. And if you guys would like to learn more, please feel free to reach out to one of our representatives on our site, and we'll connect you with these industry leading storytellers who will help your brand thrive in the podcast space. So yeah, that's all from me. I mean, thank you guys so much for listening and being here. I hope you took away something valuable. But I'll kick it back over to Tom to close this out. Thanks,
Yeah.
guys.
So there's just a couple of questions here. Laura asks, is that just in the US? The data that I showed is just in the US. And I suspect most of the data you showed was as well, Alex.
Yes. You'd be
Yeah.
correct.
And then, hi, Tom, are the 18 to 34-year-olds discovering and consuming the pods on YouTube or audio? That's not a binary answer. I will say that YouTube is certainly driving discovery, but not monopolizing discovery. It's potentially the plurality, if not the majority, of discovery. So it's a very important part of it. We have a number of reports out there, including Sound You Can See, that show that people do go back and forth between them. Shows will 65% of the audience say that they consume both. For a single show, will consume both modalities. So it's definitely, people may find it on one, but the fact that it is on audio or the fact that it's on other platforms adds to the versatility and the number of contexts in which that content can be consumed, which makes it more habitual, which I think makes it very much in line with the topics that we're talking about with health and fitness and self-improvement, which are about improving habits or making good habits. Laura asks, how does the trend of video podcasting fit with this, given a lot of wellness trends feel like they work with audio only? I think when we talk about video podcasting, I don't think we're necessarily talking about full studio productions. I think it's really just for the people that prefer video podcasting in the moment that they're preferring it, which again is contextual and variable. It may be because they want to pay attention. They don't mind that it's just two people on a mic in a living room or whatever. So I don't see them at all as not complementary. So, and that was it for the questions. So I want to thank everybody for the gift of your time and attention and for having a growth mindset yourselves, because showing up on a hot summer afternoon Here in Boston this week, it has been roughly between Mercury and Venus in terms of the temperature. So it's been angry hot. And to take the time out of your day to learn a little bit with Alex and I, we're so grateful for that. This report will be available almost immediately. You will be sent it from our very capable Lauren, who is also on the webinar with us very, very shortly. And for that, Alex, anything else you want to say before we sign off here?
No, I think you pretty much said it all. Just thank you everyone for being here and listening. And I hope, you took something away from this.
Awesome. For our American listeners, I hope you have a wonderful 4th of July. For everybody else, that's the holiday in which we celebrate throwing off the yoke of British oppression. But cheers to our British friends as well. So on behalf of Alex and everybody at SiriusXM, and of course, Brian and Lauren and Gavin and myself, it sounds profitable. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you at the next one. Cheers.